So my name is Cedric Ebiner, and I'm a parishioner at St. Joseph. And our family is involved to different degrees here. My wife Elizabeth is one of the leaders of the homeschooling group at St. Joseph. Blaise, my son, is seminarian at Camarillo, the seminary up there. And when he's around here, he helps with the altar servers. He's training them right now for the different services this week. And then my daughter Zeli is in charge of the young adult group here at the parish. So we are nicely involved here. As far as I'm concerned, my regular job is I'm a high school teacher at Loyola High School, downtown LA with the Jesuits. It's the oldest school in LA County, actually. We've been in business since 1865, so it's a great place to teach. I've been there for the past 27 years, so that's my first job out of college. So I've been enjoying myself teaching all boys over there. So I teach French. That explains the accent. I was born in Switzerland. I can't get rid of the accent. And then but I teach Latin as well. And so that connects me to the presentation from tonight about the crucifixion. So what my goal tonight is to talk to you about this practice of crucifixion, and then kind of put it in the Roman context of the first century AD. In order for us to gain an understanding of Jesus's environment when he was around, because I thought that if our goal on this side of heaven is to get to know him and to love him and to serve him, to know his historical context, where he walked and where he lived and where he died, that might help us to get to know him better and grow closer to him and develop a even deeper relationship with him in that fashion. So what I'm going to present tonight is a few different things. So I'll go back and forth between talking about, in general, the Roman world and what were the practices at the time, and then going back to the specific example of the crucifixion of Christ and how that worked out in the context of the Roman world. So I'll give a brief introduction of the historical context and geographical context of the time. Then I'll talk to you about the types of offenses that the Roman categorized in different ways that could be committed against the state. And then I'll talk about various punishments that the Romans had at their disposal in order to make sure that everybody stayed on the straight and narrow. And then I'll talk about how justice was rendered briefly in Rome, but mainly in the provinces, because that's going to be interesting to see how just the Roman justice was carried out outside of Rome in provinces like Judea especially. And then I'll focus on the death penalty and more specifically on the crucifixion. So that's kind of the plan for us tonight. So the importance of this for us at this time of the year. Last year, I had proposed to do that to the group, and I kind of proposed it late and said, well, you can come and do it after Easter. And I said, oh, I really don't want to do that after Easter because that would ruin the mood. But today, I mean, it's a great privilege to do that on Tuesday of Holy Week, because it's really something that hopefully can get our minds ready and our hearts ready for what's coming, especially after Holy Saturday, the Last Supper, and then all of Friday for the Passion. So that the fitting in the calendar is really appropriate. And so I'll talk about this because of this importance. But then one thing that is important for us to keep in mind is that, God has a perfect plan for everything, for everyone, for all of us, for every single event of our lives. But he had a great plan for salvation as well in the big picture. And then St. Paul writes that when the fullness of time had come, God sent his son. And it's worth asking the question, why did God decide to become incarnate in Jesus in the 30 AD, in the first century AD, at that time when the Roman Empire was around? So what was the thinking behind that? I mean, he could have come at any time, he could have come in any form, but that's a question to ask. And if we get a little bit of an understanding about this, that gives us a little bit more of a glimpse into God's plan and what he had in mind for us. So just to think about the time he comes, it's the first century AD. He's born during the reign of Augustus. It's during the Roman peace, the Pax Romana. I mean, the empire is really nicely settled. It's pretty close to be at its greatest width, greatest extent. And the road network for the Roman Empire that at the time is just nearly perfect. I mean, communication between, the Far East to the coast of Spain, from northern Africa all the way to Scotland. I mean, it's something that's unheard of for the time. And so for Jesus to show up at that time when communication could go around really quickly, there's probably something to do with that, so that his message could be carried out throughout the empire really nicely and efficiently. So that's an interesting thing to do. As far as the timeline, Rome was founded in the 8th century BC in 753. We start with the monarchy and the republic, during which you have big names like Julius Caesar and Pompey, Crassus, Mark Antony, and so on. And then these big shots kind of put an end to the republican system that falls apart, and then the empire starts. The empire starts before Christ in 27 BC when Augustus becomes emperor, and then he's mentioned in the Gospels during the infancy narratives. When Jesus was born was during the census of Augustus, but then Jesus dies in the 30s AD during the reign of Tiberius, and Tiberius is the second emperor of the Roman Empire, and he dies in Jerusalem, in the province of Judea, that's under Roman control. So if you look at the map of the Roman Empire, that stretches from down Egypt all the way to the island of Britannia, from Spain all the way to Persia. Judea is a small province right here on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea in the Holy Land. So small province, but a province that gave a lot of work to the Romans. Okay. So my next step is to talk about the different kinds of offenses that could be carried out against Roman law. And then I'm just going to give you a few examples, but mainly what needs to be thought about is that the Romans qualified two categories of violation. You can violation absolute duties, or you can violate relative duties. So violation of absolute duties were violations that involved putting the stability of the state at stake. So crimes like treason, or plotting against the state, trying to bear arms against the authorities, whether it's the emperor or the governor, all these things that's threatening the stability of the state. These are violation of absolute duties that needed to be dealt with severely. Okay, if you look at the other ones that come up right here, like bribery and false testimony, even making false currency, all these things have to do with the state itself. If if you're not gonna respect the rules of the courts, then that puts the justice system in doubt. If you bear false witnesses in court, same thing. If you counterfeit the currency, that's also putting the state in jeopardy at the same time. So all these things, just if you look at it as a whole, these are violation of absolute duties. That means that the state is being targeted. Then violation of relative duties are also serious ones, but they are more individual, right? So individual are being threatened by these kind of violations. So killing of a relative, murder, armed robberies. So all these things that are targeting just individuals of the empire are violations of relative duties that are punished in different ways than the violations of absolute duties. So as far as punishments go, the Romans categorize those in two different categories. We have the non-capital punishment and capital punishments. And it's important to think about this in other terms than our American way of thinking, because when we think about capital punishment, that involves the death penalty right away, right? Now, the word capital comes from the word caput in Latin. That means either the head, but in this context, it means the status, right? So non-capital punishments do not affect your status. So what kind of status did Romans have? You could be dead or alive. That's one status. You could be a citizen or a non-citizen. You could be a freeman or non-freeman, or you can be a slave, right, at the very bottom of the ladder. So if it's a non-capital punishment, then you can be fined, right, as a citizen, but you remain a citizen. Or you can, you can be demoted in the army from the rank of centurion to a regular soldier, but you'll remain a soldier and a Roman citizen. So these punishments right here affect the different people who receive these punishments, but it doesn't change their status. So these are non-capital punishments. Okay. On the other hand, capital punishments do affect your status. So you lose the status you're at. So it's possible to lose your Roman citizenship, and that's a big deal. So, for example, when people were deported or sent in exile, they would lose their status as citizens. So they would be sent to Romania or who knows where, or to the mines of Carthage, and they would be sent there either as still free men, or sometimes they would be relegated to the state of slaves. So that's what we call capital punishment. Okay, and of course you had the ultimate capital punishment that was referred to as the summum supplicium. That is the death penalty. So that's the highest or the most severe punishment that would be reserved for certain crimes like treason, magic, parricide, murders of non-citizens, the worst offenses against chastity, repeated robbery, serious arson, and bribery. And on that list, you might catch the sight of this one, repeated robbery, because if you think about Jesus being crucified with the two other criminals, they were two thieves, oftentimes referred in the Gospels. So they probably were not thieves who had just been caught stealing an apple at the market, but some guys who had been convicted of that before. So that's probably the punishment, why they were punished with the same punishment as Jesus. Okay. Now, for these executions, or for these death penalties, the idea that the Romans had, it was to serve as a deterrent. It's like, see what's happening to someone who violated the Roman law. That's what might happen to you if you have the same kind of idea, right? So that's why these punishments were oftentimes very public. So they used the public arenas they had, whether it was a theater, an amphitheater, a circus, or something like this, or some very busy street corners where as many people as possible could see the result of breaking Roman law. Okay, the spirit of the time was retribution, right, and revenge. So an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth was driving the Romans at the time, as well as the Jews before Jesus. So that's something that is interesting to keep in mind. Now, the execution, the message that the authorities wanted to send their people was to send the message that, look, that's what we're doing to take care of you, because these people are dangerous. These people are people that are going to commit bad things if we don't execute them. So that's the message we want to send, that we are trying to take care of you by doing that. But there was an important balance for them to keep up, because if the executions were too gory or too violent, then the leaders might lose face with their people, and their own people might start wondering, what kind of leader do we have who's enjoying such gruesome execution? So that's something that needed to be kept in mind in order for people not to start feeling bad for the people who were put to death in too gruesome of a way. Okay, so what kind of death were the Roman administering to different people? So they had many different options as far as what they would do, and sometimes it was the punishment that they would get was linked to a certain crime, and in other times it was not. So a very common way of putting someone to death is to beat the person to death. So beating, compared to scourging, is done with a hard object. Scourging is done with a whip. We'll talk about this later. Strangling was a very common way of putting someone to death. Drowning, so we have reference to that in the Gospels, putting a millstone around someone's neck and sending them down to the bottom of the lake, the river, the sea. That's one way to do it. They had also a very colorful way to drown people as well. For certain crimes, they would put them in a big sack with a dog, a monkey, and a snake, tie that up and throw that into the Tiber River. There were some meanings to the different animals that were inflicting different punishment to that person as he was dying. So that was interesting. And also the last one is an interesting one. Special effects were not very developed at the time. So if you had a play in which someone was killed or murdered, or someone fell off the third floor of an apartment building, take someone who was condemned to death and just do it for real, and that will look real. So that's something that was actually done by the Romans. I have a few other ones to show you. Decapitation was another one that was very common. Usually, oftentimes, upper class citizens who committed crimes that deserve death would be beheaded. There's a lot of different archaeological discoveries that have shown people who have been victims of that. If you look at the placement of the head in the wrong spot, that kind of is evidence of what happened before that. There is also a very specific one that was carried out in Rome, is to throw down the person down the Tarpeian Rock. Now, the Tarpeian Rock is on the Capitoline Hill. Capitoline Hill is one of the 7 hills of Rome. You have a picture of it right here in modern-day Rome, right? So you have some stairs, and that's the rock right here. And what they would do, they would throw people down the rock. That's a picture of it, more like that dates back to the that looks like it's in the old days of Rome. And if you committed perjury or treason, people would be thrown down the Tarpeian rock. That was your punishment. Well, that's what happened to him. Also, one that's very well known, especially for Christians, is to be condemned to the beasts. So in Latin, damnatio ad bestias. And for this, it's amazing how many records we have, not only from writings, but like this is two different mosaics right here, and then here you have some piece of terracotta from a vase or something like this. So you have a depiction of someone who seems to have his hands tied up in his back. There might be a stake holding him up, someone propping him up too, and then in the front you have leopard or something like this who's tearing him apart with some red bricks right here to represent the blood that's flowing. On the other one over here, also you have someone who's tied at a stake on a chariot that seems to be pushed by some guys who seem to be the executioners, and again, a wild animal going at the person who is waiting for his death over here. On this one right here, you can see maybe that there's one wild animal that's just hanging at his neck, tearing him apart. So that's something that was very common at the time of the Christians, and that was very public as well. Unchaste Vestal virgins that were priestesses of Vesta, if they were caught being unchaste, then their punishment was to be buried alive, which is pretty gruesome too. You probably have heard about crematio, which is the burning. For example, we have the example of St. Lawrence, who is barbecued right there. You've probably heard the story. St. Lawrence was put onto a grill with fire underneath, and then halfway through his burning, he asked to be flipped over to the, I'm done on this side, you can turn me over. So that's something that is also very common for Christians. But then there's a very famous event when the Great Fire of Rome happened in 64 AD during the reign of Nero. Nero has often been blamed for that fire because he wanted part of the city to burn so they could build even a bigger palace than he already had. But he accused the Christians of setting fire. And what he did in retribution, he had Christians tied up on the streets of Rome and then covered with either branches or wood or tar. And then he lit them up at light in order to provide some street lighting for the Romans. So that was Nero, 64 AD. One thing that is not a guaranteed condemnation to death is to be sent to the arena. So first you get sent to the gladiatorial school. So you may recognize the Google Maps satellite picture of the Colosseum right here. Something that, the Colosseum is so often visited by tourists. I mean, so many people are there. And it's a good reason to make a pilgrimage to the Colosseum too, because it was the site of so many martyrdom of early Christians. But what is not very well known is right here. If you look at the side of on the other side of the big street in front of the Colosseum, you have a little bit of an arena. And if the rest is buried under the rest of the neighborhood, and you have the picture of it right here. This is the gladiatorial school that's right next to the Colosseum. So if you are, I don't know, an athlete, a soldier, or someone who might be promising as a gladiator, your condemnation could be to the gladiatorial school. So you could be trained as a gladiator, that delays your death, then you can fight, and then who knows what happens in the arena. And some of them made it out alive if the emperor granted them freedom after that. So that's maybe the only one that allows for a reprieve, right? So that's just a few examples of the punishments that were available to the Romans. Just to remind you, in the US, we have a list of colorful ways of putting people to death. Not that are still used, but they are still constitutional in some of the states. So just interesting side notes on that one. Next thing I want to do is to talk about the administration of justice in Rome really quick, and then more interestingly in the provinces. So in Rome, you had different people who could administer justice in courts. The iudex, which is a simple judge. Praetor is a higher ranking magistrate. That's more like a Supreme Court justice. Or in any other magistrates who has been elected can render justice in Rome. But what is more interesting to talk about is how justice was administered in the provinces. So the ultimate judge of justice in the provinces was the governor of the province. So Rome at the time of Jesus was divided in 30 provinces. They're all administered by a governor. So the governor of Judea in the 30s is Pontius Pilate. You've heard about it from the Gospel. So he had great freedom on how to administer the justice that the emperor in Rome wanted him to administer, right? So what often happened is that the governor would let the local justice system take care of the little crimes. You know, if the province had been, you know, trusted for long enough and they know how to take care of themselves, then if someone steals from someone else, or if here some small crimes are happening, the Romans say, just take care of it with your own system. We'll trust that things will be taken care of. Right. It was supervised, but it was pretty hands off in that case. However, if greater crimes were committed or it was started involving the public order, then the Romans would take over that, and then the governor himself would be the one who would be the ultimate judge, and his pronouncements would be done from the bema, which is the platform on which verdicts were rendered at the palace of the governor. So if we look more carefully at Judea in the 30s AD, the emperor I mentioned before in Rome was Tiberius, the second emperor that came after Augustus. Pontius Pilate was the guy that he sent over to Judea to take care of that province. I'm sure Pontius Pilate was not too happy about this, because Judea was a very hard province to deal with you know, the Jews were so rebellious about the way they wanted to be governed. So it was a tough one to govern. So was he sent over there as a punishment? The relationship between Tiberius and Pontius Pilate from historical writings was not of the best, and Pontius Pilate had been threatened more than once that he would be taken back to Rome because his job was not as good as what Tiberius was hoping. If you look at the level underneath, if you look at the local justice system, that's back to Old Testament stuff, right? So Caiaphas, the high priest, is the ultimate judge of the Mosaic law, which is the law that's followed by the local people at the time, right? And then the Sanhedrin, which is the council of the elder, mainly made up of Pharisees and Sadducees, they would be the one advising Caiaphas on how to render judgment, right? So Caiaphas would render his justice by being supervised by the Romans, as long as it was small crimes that the Romans didn't care much about. So just if you summarize that really quickly, Tiberius, Pontius Pilate, Caiaphas, and the Sanhedrin. Just a picture on the left, this is the ossuary of Caiaphas. Ossuary is a bone box in which you put the remains of someone who has passed away. And archaeologists have found the ossuary of the high priest Caiaphas. So you can see there's a graffiti on the side of it that attests to the fact that it was his. So that kind of stuff is always cool for me to see. It's like, look, it's in the Gospels, and we have physical evidence that it's a historical character that we are talking about right here. Okay. Same token, we have, this is the stone of Pilate that's held in some museum in Jerusalem. And you can see some letters really nicely, and there's always, you know, some better way to see it. So if I transcribe it to something that's more readable, what you see is the end of a word in S, and then Tiberium. That sounds awfully like Tiberius, right, with a different ending. That's an accusative ending right here, probably direct object or something. And then Pontius Pilatus, we know the guy, right? So I think the PO was not there, but you can make up what that is right here. And then on the next line, you have, I think you just have the CTUS Judei. So Judei, that's Judea in the ending with an AE, that means it's possessive, so that's of Judea. So then it was not hard to guess that the word before that was probably praefectus, which means governor of Judea. So then that stone right here is the stone that attests the fact that Pontius Pilate and Tiberius were both historical characters that were around at the same time, and one of them, Pontius Pilate, was the governor of Judea. So pretty cool stuff right here. All right, so Jerusalem in the 30s AD looks like this. So city walls, right, around the city. And then very particular place in Jerusalem is the temple. So you have the temple walls themselves over here. And within the temple walls, you have the temples and the different parts of it going all the way to the most inner part. That's the Holy of Holies, right? So that was a very special place for the Jews right here. The temple before the Romans' arrival, that's a rendition of it right here. It's a massive, beautiful structure that was right here. But then after the Romans took over Jerusalem, after the siege of Jerusalem, then what the Romans did, they destroyed part of the wall right here to put the fortress Antonia. And the fortress Antonia is the barracks of the Roman soldiers. So imagine the offense to the devout Jews to have the pagan Roman soldiers, of all things, having kind of a foot in the temple area was just offensive to them, and that's probably why the Romans put their fortress right there. So that's just, yeah?
Where's the Temple Mount?
Temple Mount, I am not sure. Would someone know? Temple Mount?
Is it right there?
Is it where the temple is?
Same place?
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. So just a rendition of it right here. You can see the temple as before, right? That's the picture we saw before, but boom, you have the ginormous fortress right here with the soldiers where they were located. Okay. Um, all right. Just a couple of things about justice in Judea, because from scriptures we have a few examples of justice being carried out, um, like James and Stephen that were killed by locals. I think they both were stoned, right? The adulteress in John chapter 8 that was about to get stoned by the elders until Jesus showed up and say, well, if you sin, well, you remember the story. But anyways, so in this, it seems like there's some kind of death penalty, death sentence that's going to be carried out. The thing that is confusing about this is that the local courts, they could carry out their sentences, but they were not allowed to carry out the death penalty without asking permission from the Romans. So the Romans actually had to be the ones carrying out the death penalties. So you wonder, how did these guys get stoned, and then the adulteress was about to do that? There's no presence of Romans there. So that's why we guess it's probably like people taking justice in their own hands and stoning these people without, just on the heat of the moment doing something like this, right? What is interesting though, in the case of Jesus, Jesus could not have been crucified so publicly and so obviously without the consent of Pontius Pilate at the time. So if Pontius Pilate had said no to Caiaphas in the Sanhedrin, then Jesus could not have been executed. So the Romans have to take at least some of the blame for the execution of Jesus. So that's an interesting thing for us to know. Just about the law enforcement in the provinces. So in each province, in the 30 provinces around the empire, the Romans usually had one legion there. That's about 4,000 men that were in charge of the entire area of a province. Since Judea was a smaller province, there was only 6 cohorts that were there. 6 cohorts is 1/6 of the legion, so a smaller amount of guys. And these soldiers were the law enforcement of the Romans. Now, in Judea, the local police is the guards, the temple guards, right? The temple guards are the police of Caiaphas. They are the ones who are making sure that the Mosaic law is being carried out. So oftentimes, for example, when you go to I forget what gospel it is, but when they go to the Garden of Gethsemane, that's the temple guards who go there, but you have one Roman official who's going with them. There's a mention of one of them being with there, so you can see the supervision of the local police by the Romans, which is interesting to see. Okay, so that's for that. All right, so let's talk about the crucifixion itself. And so we have to start with the scourging, because the scourging was actually something that was done before any kind of death sentence, whether it was a crucifixion or a drowning or a strangling or something like this. Scourging was part of the initial ritual for that. So the whip that was used during that time was either called the flagrum or the flagellum. So this picture right here is one that was it's a copy of a whip that was found in Herculaneum. I don't know if you know where Herculaneum is, but it's close to Pompeii. It's another city that was a victim of Mount Vesuvius in a different way. It's not covered by ashes, but it's a different thing that happened there. But many different discoveries were found in Herculaneum, and one of the things that they found is a flagrum. So with 2 strands of leather, of course the leather wasn't there, but there was the lead dumbbells shaped ends to it that were with it, so they were able to figure out how it looked. The thing that's fascinating about the shape of these dumbbells from the flagrum from Herculaneum, they match almost exactly the marks of the beating on the Shroud of Turin. So if studying the Shroud of Turin and the marks on the shroud itself, which is undoubtedly the marks of someone who has gone through some kind of passion, including the whipping, you can almost match these to the marks of the beating in the back of that person. So the flagrums were, I have a few examples of them right here. So I'm a high school teacher, and some of my students have done different kinds of projects. Not that I assigned students to make a whip, but some of them have decided to make one. And so it's based on different sources that I give them. And so this one in particular is really well done, because when you hold it, it's pretty fragile now. It's kind of an old one, but when you hold it, you really feel the weight of the whip. So if you want to pass it around, but that's, they would have 3, 4, 6, 12 strands of leather, at the end of which they would have to add some kind of weight. So the weight was either some kind of metal, some nails, some sheep bones, or different things, just to add the weight to make it more painful when the whipping was happening. The Jews had a limitation of 40 blows for some punishments. If you do more than 40, then you are violating Mosaic law. Imagine that. So then the Jews were interesting because they whipped the person 39 times to make sure they didn't cross the line. You know how they were so observant. Well, no, because Jesus. So that's an interesting thing for the Jews. But since Jesus was whipped by the Romans, then there was no limit to that, right? So that's for that. Now the scourging would happen, there was two options, and there was either a pillar that was about 3 feet tall, uh, whether the person was tied to it, exposing his back. So they were for sure completely naked to increase the humiliation of the whole process. And so the person was stripped naked and exposing all of his back to the two executioners in the back, right? Or again, completely naked on a post that was 6 or 7 feet tall, again to expose as much as possible of the skin of the back for the person who is showing himself like this. The scourging was so brutal that it has been guessed that no soldiers in their right mind could do it. So either the guys had to be on something, drunk or under some kind of drugs, or they had some soldiers who maybe were not completely there who managed to carry out the sentence. The scene of the Passion of the scourging, I think one of the best acting is from the two guys of the Passion of the Christ movie, the two guys who are in charge of the scourging, because they really give you this idea that they're not all there. They are crazy. So that's for that. Now let's take an example of someone who's being scourged from a tall pillar right here. So the person is completely naked, and so you have two lictors on two sides. I mean, two soldiers who are taking turn whipping from one side to the other, and the whipping goes all over the place. It goes from the shoulders and the head and the back and the bottom and the thighs and the calves and under the feet as well. So the whole thing is being done by these two guys. If you look at this view, I don't know if you can tell, but it's a view from up on top of it. And so that's what would happen. Now, one of the sources to kind of see what happens during the scourging is this book by Pierre Barbet. He's a French surgeon who wrote this book a long time ago. So some of it has been questioned, and some more research has been done. But this is the view of a doctor who followed Jesus from the Garden of Gethsemane all the way to his death at the end of his being crucified. So when he describes what happens during the scourging, what happens to the back, start with bruises for a short time, cuts start happening, then you start reaching veins, and then the blood flows, and then you get to the muscles, the arteries. And there's even some quotes, I think I have one coming up, from some Roman philosopher who describes the back of a person who has been flogged, showing even the bones. And so Pierre Barbet, the surgeon, has a quote to describe the back at the end of the scourging. It goes like this: the skin of the back is hanging in long ribbons, and the entire area is an unrecognizable mass of bleeding tissue. So that's the first thing that I have to go through before the crucifixion itself. Okay? When it comes to crucifixion, so before we get into what happened, the Romans are really not very original in many different ways, but they stole many things from different nations in order to and then perfected it. So you can talk about like the Roman Navy. The Romans are not Navy at all. So once they conquered Greece or Carthage, then they recruit from the Carthaginians, they copy their boats, and then they became a major naval power. The gods, I mean, let's go to the Greeks, we steal them all, change the names, and we have our pagan gods, right? So, but it happens like this for many different things. Same thing for crucifixion. It seems that crucifixion starts a long time before the Romans in Persia, Far East, start moving towards Egypt and Syria, who used it. We know that Alexander the Great made great use of a lot of usage of the crucifixion itself. Then it gets to Carthage, and after Carthage, one of the people in Carthage who used it was one of their leaders, Dennis the Tyrant. Then it eventually arrives in Rome. Okay, so the Romans, though, had plenty of other means to execute people. Some that were, I don't know, sometimes at least as gory as the crucifixion. Take, for example, I guess we can talk about this. So tough guys here, like impalement, for example, right? You take a stake about that big, nice and sharp at the end, strip the guy naked, and sit him on it until the stake comes out of his mouth. I mean, that should be a deterrent, right? But then it's too fast, though. You want it to last because the guy dies in a minute. So when the Romans got hold of crucifixion, they thought that seems to be really painful and it could last for days. So when they got hold of this manner of putting people to death, then the Romans really perfected the use of it. And I'll give you a few records of crucifixion throughout Roman history. Quintus Varus is a successor of Pontius Pilate as governor of Judea. And after the death of Herod, there were some riots that were going on. So to teach the Jews a lesson, he crucified 2,000 of them. Caligula, the emperor that came soon after Tiberius, right after Tiberius, crucified some Jews in public in the theater of Alexandria in Egypt. During the siege of Jerusalem, that's writings from Josephus. So Josephus was a Jewish historian friendly to the Romans. So his writings are not very popular, but he describes what the Romans did during the siege of Jerusalem. So the Jews were entrenched behind the city walls, and they didn't want to surrender. So the Romans pitched camp all around the cities, trying to starve them to death, but it was taking too long. So at some point, they started putting crosses outside city walls and crucified Jews that they captured, right within seeing distance from the walls of Jerusalem. So people who were inside could see their relatives, their friends, whoever, their neighbors being crucified on the crosses. So once they died, though, at the end of the day, they would load them on catapults and then throw them over the walls for them to just take a closer look to them. Probably nails and ropes when they ran out of nails. Yeah, and whatever, so this is just his writings about it. You probably have heard also about the rebellion of Spartacus, the slaves in the 70s BC. So that's quite a bit of time before Jesus' time. But these slaves under the leadership of Spartacus rebelled against the Romans. They started beating Roman armies, and they started to be a real threat to the Romans until Crassus, who is one of the three guys of the first triumvirate, along with Caesar and Pompey, decided to take an actual whole legion, go after Spartacus. He beat them, and then in order to make a statement to the rest of the slaves who still were thinking maybe we should keep rebelling, so he lined up the Via Appia for miles on end south of Rome with 6,000 followers of Spartacus. So when you would come to Rome from the south at that time, you would have this spectacle of these guys dead, half eaten up by wild animals, who were just waiting to die at that point. So sending a message by doing that. Great movie with Kirk Douglas to watch too. All right. Okay. This is Seneca. Seneca was a philosopher, Stoic philosopher, so a pagan. Just no real affinity for us Christians, but here's his quote about crucifixion. So I'll just read it for you. Is there such a thing as a person who would actually prefer wasting away in pain on a cross, dying limb by limb, one drop of blood at a time, rather than dying quickly? Would any human being willingly choose to be fastened to that cursed tree, especially after the beating that left him deadly weak, deformed, swelling with vicious welts on shoulders and chest, and struggling to draw every last agonizing breath? Anyone facing such a death would plead to die rather than mount the cross. So that's from Seneca, and he's not talking about it within the context of Christianity, about the suffering being something that is a good thing in the end and all that, but it's just a purely detached description of it that gives you just an idea of what people thought about crucifixion at the time. And it's important to think about it that way. Like the quote I had in the title page with the quote of Cicero that described what crucifixion is, from Seneca, what crucifixion is, and just the description that I've given you. So when you have like this Jesus guy who just ends up on a cross, I mean, it's just, we talk about the scandal of the cross. I mean, it's hard for us to really fathom what kind of scandal we're talking about, because at the time, for someone who's claiming to be the Son of God to end up there is just put everything upside down for everybody who knows what crucifixion is, and everybody does at the time, okay? So really quick, the crucifixion penalty was mainly a slave punishment. But then, everybody is possible to be put to death like this. I mean, Roman citizen probably not, although Cicero, puts on trial someone who put someone else, a citizen, on a cross. So it has happened sometimes. And then it's usually punishment for desertion, murder, repeated theft, again, talked about this before, and inciting rebellion. So, Jesus was condemned to death by the Jews for blaspheming, right? But for the Romans, in order to justify the crucifixion, they had to find something else. I mean, for him to be blaspheming against Mosaic law, Pontius Pilate didn't give a hoot about that. But Pontius Pilate started to get worried about the rebellion that was brewing, and so that's something that really helped him to make the wrong decision. All right, so the first thing that happened, so the guy, the person survives crucifixion, right? And I'm sorry, survives the scourging. So the next part is the carrying of the cross. So what is important for us to keep in mind with that is that carrying of the cross is mainly the carrying of the patibulum. The patibulum is the cross beam, right? That is right here, because the weight of the cross, if it were a full cross, would be close to 250 to 300 pounds. After scourging like they would receive, it was probably unlikely they would be able to do that. So what they would carry is called the patibulum. That word patibulum comes from the word pateo, that means to close, because it's referring to that beam that was also used to close the gates of a city. You know when you have two gates that close and you put a big bar across them? That's the kind of bar we're talking about right here. So that was about 60, 70 pounds. I mean, there's a range of weights that it can be. And so what they would do, they would be tied to that beam on their shoulder, right? And then their hands would be tied to it. They are preceded by the titulus. The titulus is a piece of wood on which the crime of the person is written. So in front of the thieves, the guys would be carrying their patibulum on their back, and in front of them, carried by a kid or a soldier on a horse or something like this, on it, it would say thief. And then the people who would be on the side of the road would see, oh, here is a thief. Oh, he's going to get crucified. He's carrying the crossbeam on his back, right? So the titulus, right, for Jesus, what did it say on it? Yeah, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And if you think about what it says, it was probably a Roman who wrote this, because no Jews would admit that, at the time, would admit that he was the King of the Jews, right? So it was Pontius Pilate's sarcasm to the Jews. So that's his crime. No, that's not what we want. But that's what they did. So the titulus is paraded with the people through the streets. And then in the end, it would be nailed on the cross to remind people as they walk by the place of execution that's the reason why the person was crucified. Now, you wonder, well, what about the upright, right? The upright, that's called the stipes or the stauros in Greek, is permanently at the place of execution. It's always there, it stays there, and the only thing that comes up and down is the crossbeam, okay? The type of crosses that the Romans had at their disposal, well, they had a few options. Oopsie daisy, okay. So if they had a tree that had the right shape, well, don't bother about carpentry, right? So just crucify the guy, even if it's uneven, that does the trick, right? That's what they could do. The crux imisa, that's the one we're used to. Imisa, that means sent in, or the Latin cross, or the cross with a head, capitata, that's the one that we're used to, right? So that would be a possibility of how to crucify the prisoners. This requires a little bit more elaborate carpentry with that one, rather than having a notch at the top of this one, and use the crux commissa or the tau cross. Tau is the capital letter T in the Greek alphabet. So that would be most likely used. The thing that is also important to keep in mind, most Romans crucified their prisoners on a short cross. They were 6 or 7 feet tall. That's called the crux humilis, that's the low cross, compared to the crux sublimis, that's 10 feet or higher. Which kind of goes against most crucifixes we see. And I'm talking here about in general, Jesus, I don't know, we can guess, but you...
6 feet tall.
Yeah, so, but the thing is about 6 feet tall crosses, if you think about it, first of all, it's really practical to take care of. You put that on top, and then, but after the guy is crucified, and you leave that person 2 or 3 days on the place of execution, people who pass by, they pass by at eye level. Right, and so I mean, it's not like, oh, there's someone up there and that I can't really relate to. It's like, no, you can see it, smell him, and hear him, and everything else, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Just a bit of visual. So just one thing about this: if you look at this position right here, patibulum on the back with hands tied to it, or arms tied to it, and then remember the state of the person after the scourging. I mean, the person is likely to trip. Right, and if you trip in that kind of situation, I mean, there's not too many options. But the first thing that hits, it's probably the knees if you're lucky, but then it's your face, right, with 50, 60 pounds on your back. So interesting. I mean, we could do a whole presentation for 2 hours about the image on the shroud, because there's still stuff on the shroud that shows that the person on the shroud has a broken nose. And so, is it from a beating that he got before? Is it because of this? I mean, there's many different possibilities to talk about that. So, all right. All right. So let's talk about the next part. So when the prisoner gets to the place of execution, the stipes are up, right? So the prisoner arrives. They detach him from the patibulum. The patibulum is thrown on the ground, and the prisoner is thrown on the patibulum, right? So probably the neck on the beam. And then the Romans had that to a science. So the guys who would nail the prisoner to the cross would always be the same guys because they know exactly what to do. They would put one arm on the beam and then one knee to hold their arm still, and then they would drive some nails that were about this length, right, but about this shape, right, except for the end would be sharp like this one. And so they would drive these nails through the hands and through the feet. Now, if you nail someone through the palm, it's likely that the weight of the body might tear through the skin and the person might fall forward. So if they were to nail someone through the hands, they would have to tie the person as well, which makes the execution a little bit less efficient. You do have to do both the nailing and the tying. So what happened, though, we know that the Romans had found a spot in the wrist called the destot space. I think I have some X-rays somewhere. Yeah. So if you nail in the palm, then it's likely to rip through, right? But if you find the destot space, you can pass this around. My dad is a doctor, and I asked him, I was doing a presentation on this a long time ago, do you have something to help? So I said, yeah, sure, you can do that. And so I put in purple the destot space, which is actually part of your wrist, and it's under the pinky. You have some bone that protrudes here, and it's somewhere around here. And if you drive a nail through that spot between the different bones of the wrist, then the bones spread out, and you can nail through this without breaking anything. That way you can fulfill some prophecies there, right? And then you can go through it and nail the person to the cross without a problem. The thing that is interesting to know also about language, when Thomas says, I want to see his hands so that I can believe, the hands in Greek, in ancient languages, it includes the wrist as well. So your hand goes from your fingers down to your wrists. So seeing someone's hands include that part too, which kind of still is consistent to think about that. Okay. One thing that is very important to know is that when you nail someone through the destot space right here, you're going to hit the median nerve. Now, the median nerve, if you don't know what it is, you know what it is. It's your funny bone, right? You feel the median nerve when you hit your funny bone the wrong way, and when you do that, you have this electric shock that goes through your arm, right? So, but if something's touching it constantly, you have the same permanent pain that goes through your arm as long as something's touching it. So that is an important thing to think about. And we'll see that later, but the thing is, like, the person was not still, on the nails. I'll show you why in a little bit. As far as the feet go, you don't have that worry about the tearing through because the weight of the person goes down, right? So you don't have to find a spot in the bones in order for it not to get out. So that's not a problem. So 2 feet next to each other, 2 feet on top of each other, the two options are possible. The thing is, though, what is interesting, only 3 nails from crucified people have ever been found across the empire by archaeologists. And the reason for that is Romans reused everything, right? But then in 1968, they were digging to build some kind of high-rise building in Jerusalem. And what they did, they found a grave. And in the grave, you had the ankle bone of this one right here, of a crucified guy. And the thing is, the nail was going to the side, from the side through the ankle. And then the end of the nail was bent. So it probably had hit a knot in the upright, and the nail had bent, right? So then they couldn't use it. So they buried the guy with a nail since they knew they wouldn't reuse it, right? But then it's fascinating because then you think about it, what does that mean to have a nail coming from the side? That means that, and the thing that is interesting too, they found some chips of wood of one kind on this side and of 2 different kinds on this side. So what they guessed is that you had the wood of the upright right here that was found on this piece, but then you had the wood of some other thing, so maybe a board that was there to hold the ankle more steady so that the guy maybe doesn't yank out or something like this. The thing is, as I was preparing for this, that's the only one I knew about. But in 2019 and in 2023, they found two more of these bones, one in Italy and one in England. Same exact location in the ankle going from the side, right? So then that gives you two options on the way the person could be nailed with this kind of crucifixion from the feet. So of course from the two sides, right? Or something more awkward like this that could be possible, but not very likely. So that's the way it would be. Now, what is interesting too is that in the earliest depiction of crucifixion, you can see that too. So I don't know if you can. This is the same thing, right? This is harder to see, but that's the transcription on it on black and white, right? So this is a graffiti that is etched on a house in Pozzuoli, that's southern Italy, close to Naples, and you can tell it's the picture of a crucified man. First of all, that's what's interesting. It's shown from his back, right? Because you can see the upright right here, right? And then the person is facing that way. Probably maybe for just modesty reason. What you see also is that the 2 feet on both sides of the cross, right? So that's 2nd century AD, right? And then you can see the marks of the scourging. What else could it be, right? It's not his striped pajama, or I mean, that's what it is. And so you can tell the marks of the scourging is just, they are everywhere, from the shoulders all the way down to the thighs. And so interesting. Also, what's interesting is that it's a tau cross. It's a capital T, right? There's no top to it. Like very early on depiction of that. Okay. Just two more things right here. This is a crucifix that was done by a French artist that just follows everything that you have on the Shroud of Turin as closely as possible. So they've tried to do it so you can see like the nailing is in the desktop space rather than in the hands, and so that's just based on that. This right here, I just put it for the extra part of this the cross, which is the sedile, which is a little seat, and you may wonder, it's like, oh, it's to provide some relief. Well, probably not. That's probably because the Romans put a spike going up in order to prevent the person from resting down. So that's for that. One thing that is important to keep in mind with Jesus' crucifixion, I mean, a lot of the things that I'm saying kind of doesn't fit the usual crucifixes, right? Shorter cross rather than a bigger one, capital T rather than nailing in the wrist and stuff like that. It doesn't match all the Jesus images that I have in mind for what he is. But what is important to remember is that we don't have any depiction of Jesus crucified for about 250 years, because crucifixion was such something you didn't want to talk about or associate with, that even Christians were trying not to depict Jesus like this. I mean, you have picture of Jesus, the Good Shepherd. That's probably one of the earliest representation, with the sheep on his back. He doesn't even have a beard, a young guy. So that's a lot more encouraging than that, especially if you're going after a pagan crowd in order to take them in, right? This is the first depiction of Jesus crucified, but it's actually a parody, because this was found. This is a graffiti again. So the transcription right here. This was found in a jail cell on the Palatine Hill in Rome, and it was probably etched by a prisoner making fun of a fellow prisoner. And this, it says right here, Alexandros is worshiping his god. And so Alexandros is probably a cellmate who is represented as a little kid hailing his god, and his god is crucified again on a T-shaped cross, but his god has the head of a donkey. So that's probably a pagan guy who was making fun. It's like, only an ass could be on a cross like this, right? So, it's that kind of inmate type of humor going on. Also, right here, this is another earlier representation of crucifixion of Jesus, actually. So you can see, kind of a bearded figure on a T-shaped cross as well. And then, in the 400s, you have kind of sort of a crucifixion, but not really, because we don't have a cross, right? Or do we? And then in the 400s again, you have some very beginning of crucifixion being depicted like this. So that discrepancy of 2 or 3 centuries between the time of crucifixion and the time we have representation of it, there's no eyewitness accounts who just describe the different parts of it. So we can guess on what Jesus was actually crucified on. Last thing that I want to cover is how someone dies on the cross, right? So it's hard to really put a finger on, on how people dies on the cross. Like, it's not someone who gets shot to the heart and where he died of a gunshot wound to the heart, right? But you don't die of crucifixion. You die of something else that's caused by all the different things that are part of it. So one thing to keep in mind with that is that the time of survival on the cross is inversely proportional to the severity of the scourging. Does that sound good? So that means, like, the harder the scourging, the shorter the time the person is going to survive on the cross. But if the scourging is mild, I guess you can say something like this, then the person is likely to survive 2, 3, 4 days. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind to start with. The thing then that to kind of remind ourselves of is the state of the body when he's crucified. So the person has been weakened by the scourging, the pain has put some trauma on the person's mind and body. Loss of blood is really important during that time. So with low blood pressure, less oxygen gets to the vital organs, the heart, the lungs, and liver and everything else. The back keeps bleeding through the crucifixion because the person is naked on the cross, and in order to stay alive, these wounds are rubbing against that, so the bleeding keeps happening. So all these different things just put the person in some kind of state of shock, and you know that when you're in a state of shock, it's hard to reverse that, and the different main organs start shutting down. One thing that Pierre Barber in this book really explained really well, but that has been more recently kind of doubted, is the whole breathing ordeal. To me, it makes a lot of sense, but I'm not a doctor, but I'll just leave you with that, and you'll do your own reading and decide what to think about. But what is interesting to think about, when someone is in a position of a crucified man, he is stuck in an inhaling position, right? So it's like, and in order to exhale, he has to contract his muscles and his lung to go, right? So he's in a position that doesn't allow him to do the inhale, exhale. So to exhale, what the person has to do, he has to push on his feet to put some relief on the lungs, so that when he pulls himself up, then the muscles can contract and he can exhale at that time, right? Now, when he's able to do that, then he can get some relief and then just stay up like this as long as he can. But since he's pushing on feet that are on a nail, then he can do that forever and just sags again. But then when you sag again, then the hands start hurting, can't breathe again, so you have to push, and it's just a constant struggle to do that kind of stuff. If he doesn't, then it's shallow breathing, and then of course the body can't survive forever with shallow breathing. What is important to think about too is, as the person is pushing himself up on his legs, the angle of the arms change, right, from something like this to something like this. So you have a rotation that happens in the wrists on the square nails that must be absolutely horrendous to just go through, among the many other things. So that's for that. Now the death happens after the state of shock gets worse and worse. Dehydration is really something that's also part of it that needs to be considered because of the loss of blood and the sweating that happens there. And as the state of shock persists, we have water buildup that starts happening in two important places: the lungs, and then in around the heart. And so, since the heart is getting flooded around it by water, then the heart is not able to beat as regularly as it's supposed to, and eventually we have a heart failure, and then death follows that. Just about the spear, that is interesting about this building of fluid. Remember when the soldier pierces Jesus, water and blood come out, right? So what happens during a state of shock, especially in that position, the heart that you have right here is surrounded by a pocket called the pericardium, right? So the heart is inside a pocket, and as the ordeal goes on, the pericardium, but not the heart, the pericardium fills up with water, right? And so the heart is getting tighter and tighter with the buildup of water pressure. That's why it's harder for the heart to beat, right? Jesus dies. The Romans order, at the end of the day of crucifixion, since it was festival the next day, they had to finish the 3 crucifixions early, so that the bodies wouldn't be out during the festival. So then they want to finish up the prisoners, right? And what the Romans do is the crucifixion, which is the breaking of the legs. And the breaking of the legs goes right along with that breathing ordeal thing, because if they break the legs, then there's no way they can push themselves up to breathe out, right? So then you die within minutes after that. The thing is, when they get to Jesus, they think he's dead, and they double check by piercing him to make sure that he is, right? And blood and water come out. And so it's interesting. And I think it's from the Gospel of Luke that we get the account of blood and water. I'm not 100% sure about that. But if it is, he's a doctor, and he would have noticed the blood and water coming out. And the water comes out of the pericardium first, right? And then after that, when he pulls out the lens, then the blood from the heart comes after that. So it's interesting. Of course, there's some symbolism with blood and water, right? There's a lot of things to be said about that. But also, scientifically, to have blood and water coming out of a stab to the heart of someone who was crucified, that also makes sense. Okay? So that's for that. So all of this to say what? I don't know. To me, it's just to try to think about, first, to put Jesus within his historical context is an important thing to do. When you start a relationship with someone, you want to know as much as possible from that person. You know, what do you do in free time? You know, who do you frequent? And, you know, where are you from? Who do you hang out with? What is it like to live where you live? And so to know more about Jesus's time and the people he had to deal with and who was in charge and stuff like this, to me, it's like, you know, the more I know, the better it is. So hopefully I provided a little bit of that for you to consider. But then if you consider like the extent of his love and, you know, all this suffering, you know, to some extent similar to what I described to you, you know, he did that for me because of his love for me and for me to be, you know, able to join him eventually in heaven. I mean, that's, you know, hopefully can get, you know, you got a few different new things to consider as far as the depth and the breadth of his love for us. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Want to break them up into groups, or?
I don't have any specific questions for you guys to discuss, but I'm sure you, or what's that? Q&A. Oh yeah, I mean, or you have anything to contribute? I mean, you know, there's some things I didn't say it right. I mean, anything else to add or to ask? I'm open. Yeah.
The depiction of the Passion of Christ
Yeah.
by Mel Gibson.
Yeah.
Was that pretty close to
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
you
So,
had said?
well, when I watched it, so I gave that. I've been giving this presentation to my students forever, even before the Passion came out. So when the Passion came out, I said, "Oh, cool! Let's see, you know, how that fits what I've been presenting, right?" And so it was really, really great. I mean, yeah, I mean, I can say many things, but for example, it's really well researched, right? So Mel Gibson, and then I've met the Jesuit priest who did the research for him. He was an archaeologist at Loyola Marymount. I mean, a great guy and a really solid priest too. So it was really well researched, right? So then the thing is that there's a balance between the accuracy and then the what's on screen. And so Jesus is carrying his whole cross. What's up with this? Didn't you do your research? But then before you get worked up, then you see the two thieves behind him who are just carrying the crossbeam, right?
Yeah.
So then the message is like, we've done our research, but so what was the but? So I asked him, and he said the reason why we had Jesus carry his whole cross is to not distract the audience. Because if you see Jesus crossing, you know, carrying a railroad tie or something like that, what's up with that? You know, it's just not to distract. So, but you know, they can tell you they've done research because you look at the thieves, that kind of stuff. So, the thing is, like, for example, the breathing ordeal, like that's something that you don't see Jesus struggling with, you know, trying to go up and down to breathe under cross. So I caught that I was not there. But again, I told you this theory of the breathing has been contested. So, you know, there's different theories with that. Some of the doctors who have studied the Passion said that, you know, that was not really necessary. You know, one of the main problems. But well. So Father Bill Fulco, he passed away by now, was a great advisor to Mel Gibson for the movie. And then the other one, we had Jim Caviezel come to our school to do a presentation, The Year of the Passion. That's the best talk I've ever heard, I think. But one thing that he said that was really, really powerful is that when they filmed the scourging, during the whipping, so the soldiers are going full force with a flogging, right? with whips that look a lot worse than mine, right? But then we don't see that in the movie, of course. But he had a board on his back to protect him. But they were doing full force at the board. But then during one of the scenes, one of the leather strips goes around the board and gets him in the chest, right? Just one, and yeah, it was deadly painful. But he said how powerful of an experience it was for him to realize with this little thing that was so bad what Jesus actually did for him. That's the way he put it, right? So yeah, there's someone.
Yeah, I made a comment. The actor that played the Roman soldier that was flogged
Yeah,
was Muslim,
Oh,
and then, so that's why it was so easy for him to have that deranged look while he was whipping Jesus.
is that right? Oh, you didn't know that.
And so afterwards, he actually converted to Catholicism.
Yeah, that's great.
About like say a decade later.
Yeah. This book right here. So that's just pictures from the movie. This one is written by one of the Legionaries of Christ that was on set to kind of advise the actors and the crew. And there's some great stories like this that are in there. So it's a great book to read along with watching the movie. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
So I had not ever seen crucifixes with the ankles
Yeah.
nailed. Is that how most crucifixions are done? Was Jesus crucified maybe that way with the ankles like on either side of the beam?
Well, it's a good question. And up until this year, the way I presented that part was always like, well, and sometimes, they might have crucified people in a different way. But then with these discoveries that, and I hadn't read up on them until this past week about the discoveries, one in Italy and one in England. I mean, that's the only nails of crucifixion we found were from the ankles, right? And so, and then I had not seen the graffiti that I showed you, right? The one with a whipping in the back that was also crucified on the side. So, and with the reading I did, it seems like it's a lot more common than I thought. So, I don't know.
What does the shroud say though?
Yeah, well, the shroud says it's the front. No doubt about that. Yeah, yeah. So the nail in the shroud is the front of the feet. So yeah. So I mean, I'm not here to just put in doubt the images of Jesus that we have on the crucifix, because it could be all true. I mean, Jesus might have been on a high cross. Jesus might have been on a Latin cross. Jesus might have been, nailed in front. I mean, the crucifix that we have of Jesus might just be right, but what I wanted to do is to just, kind of give a more general picture of crucifixion in the Roman world. And then, yeah. And, of course, with any practice of whatever, there's always some exceptions, right? So yeah, I mean, but I learned something in the past couple of weeks, thanks to you guys. Yeah.
The only disappointment in the movie that I had was that he was given the sponge on a spear and not his branch.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's the only thing that bothers me about the movie.
Okay. Well, I'm glad there's not more than that, so it's pretty.
I go,
Yeah.
a friend of mine told me, if I want that movie, she said he felt it.
I brought two spears. The one that I have over here, that's the usual spear of Roman foot soldiers, right? So that's the one that they would carry in campaigns. So the way this is, that we have very small hard tip to it, right? But the guards, when the Romans were on guard duty, they had lances instead of spears like this. So this is more of a throwing javelin, but this is not exactly the right one. This is more like a replica of a Spartan spear, but it has the right end to it. So it's more shaped like a knife, and it's easier to keep people away with something like this that's more threatening than a small tip like this one. So then the thing that is interesting too is that on the shroud, the wound on the side has the shape of a blade rather than a tip, which goes along with who was at the foot of the cross, a Roman guard, not a Roman foot soldier kind of thing, right? I mean, yeah. So that's consistent with that.
I just saw something on a documentary the day that they were digging in the Vatican, St. Paul Cathedral, or here, and they found that the coffin of Caiaphas, so many feet down, and it's written on the box of the tomb, Caiaphas, and then they have another one next that says the son of
Yeah, yeah, I
They
saw that
found
too.
2 nails, so the guy that was doing the parading was interested in more of what the nails, whose they were.
Oh,
So they figures if it was Caiaphas, maybe he brought it, kept them as a trophy. So they were trying to figure out what happened to the nails, so they couldn't find them.
interesting.
Towards the end of the documentary, they found that someone had them. I don't remember, but that's what I saw where the nails nailed to the heel.
The ankle, yeah, the ankle, yeah,
But yeah, I didn't watch the whole thing, but that was pretty interesting.
yeah. So that's probably the box right here, right? That you saw? Yeah.
Similar to that, but it said his name on the side.
Right. Well, I think that's the one right here. Like that's the name right there. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, they showed it as the one of his son.
Yeah. Right. I read that recently too. Yeah. Yeah. Well, what I really like to see is like, I mean, just when you study from these different sources about these different practices and everything like this, and then you go back to the Gospels and you go, wow, the Gospels are such great history books.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, and there's no better description of a crucifixion in literature than the Gospels. And it's important to keep in mind, and that, I know we don't have any problems with that, but my teenage students, they need to be reminded often, like, the Gospels, that's their history book, right? I mean, it's describing historical facts, and the guys who wrote it, if they had written things that were not accurate, that would have been debunked long time ago, and they wouldn't have survived until now. But when you compare the things that we have in the Gospels, and you have names like Pontius Pilate and Caiaphas and Tiberius and Augustus and all these guys that are obviously historical characters, it's so comforting. And the thing is, it's also great to see that our God is not some force or some power here. It's not nature. He's a guy who came down during the reign of Tiberius and was crucified during the time of Pontius Pilate because he loved me. It's like, it's so much more meaningful than the big buzz and yeah.
Yeah, this is more of a gospel question. I've wondered about. You have 4 accounts of the crucifixion. So were the accounts by people that we know that John was there, but Matthew, Mark, and Luke, what do the scripture scholars say about, were they actually there, or did they get eyewitness accounts and then reported it by those eyewitness accounts?
Well, we know they were not there, right? Because the only apostle who stayed at the cross was John.
Well,
right?
were there people could they have been further away?
Right. Well, I don't know if they themselves would be far away, like being eyewitnesses, but they should had to talk to some eyewitnesses in order to write what they wrote. So that's not my field of expertise. But one thing that is really, really cool to read about is to compare the accuracy of the Gospels with texts that I assign to my students to read, because the trail that you have from, like, for example, one of the most read texts in Latin is the Gallic War of Julius Caesar, when Julius Caesar in the 50s BC goes and conquers modern day France, right? And he goes out there, and then you read that as gospel truth, right? I mean, that's what he did. He went there, and he has like this description of his siege works and tactics and all that, and we trust that. But the trail that goes from the original to the text we have today is so spotty in comparison to the Gospels. And the Gospels, it's like so easy to trace back all the text, and they are so faithful throughout the ages, right? So then what I say to my students, like, well, if you have any doubts of the Gospels, about what the Gospels are saying, you better start having doubts about many other things, including the Gallic War of Julius Caesar, the histories of Tacitus and Herodotus, and right. So, I mean, the difference in the accuracy and the reliability of the records is like a world of difference. If you're going to dare to doubt the Gospels, you better doubt any ancient history. So that's also pretty cool when you study that kind of stuff.
On his point, though, Luke was friends, or they think he was really friendly with the Blessed Virgin, who was there, right?
Yeah.
Because his descriptions of the birth, his descriptions of the
Right.
right at Bethlehem, all of that was reflected in what they thought could only be known by Our Lady.
Yeah.
So if he was friends with Our Lady, she was there.
Yeah.
And so that his could have been a first-hand testimony.
Yeah.
From her.
Yeah.
I've heard that.
We forget about that.
Yeah.
She was
She was there.
She's probably like, everyone gather around me. Let me give you guys something that helps.
He gave her to us then and there. He gave her to us.
John's, I'll write it later.
along those lines, in the first couple of lines of Luke, it even says that he investigated and he talked to witnesses.
Yeah.
And then Mark was a disciple of Peter. So that's another account for him as well.
As for the shape of the cross or which version it was, I would just, and this is just speculation, but like the early artworks where it says like Alex is worshiping God, it could have been that part of the mockery of that image along with the donkey head was the shorter cross shape.
Yeah.
Or he may have just not known himself what it was. He just knew that this guy's worshiping someone who was crucified.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's totally possible. Just removing the Jesus crucifixion itself, and I don't think I said that, but the two different sizes of crosses, you crucified well-known enemies of the state on the crux sublimis, which is the high one. I mean, for the other thieves and, you know, then low cross. So that's the general rule. But again, you know, and I mean, and also the other thing, for the Romans, Jesus was a nobody.
Yeah.
Right? But maybe Caiaphas convinced Pontius Pilate to put him on a high cross. I don't know. Yeah. Right, sure. Yeah, that's true. Good one. I like that. Right.
There you go. This kind of attention.
Yeah.
The Gospels were written, what is it, 30 years after? If I recall correctly, or?
No, Mark wrote. He's the first one who wrote the Gospel. And how soon did Mark get? Yeah. 56 years.
Earliest would be 50s, latest would be about 90s, but most people speculate because of all the prophecies that are fulfilled, like the temple destroyed, it's probably way before 70.
Okay.
So, I mean, a lot of scholars, a lot of atheists will say, "Oh no, like 120." That's not true.
Yeah.
No.
Last of the original apostles, John died around 100. So he was writing.
He was the youngest of the
sure to his late times. And the fall of the temple was 70.
Any record of like a earthquake that happened? Yeah, the Holy of Holies.
Yeah.
Pay-per-view.
I don't know. I mean, you know, there's so many things to look into that are so exciting. Like, is there any faults you can date back to 3080? You know, or something like this. I mean, I've asked the same question about the stars at the Nativity. You know, can you just go back into like constellation position history and find that out? I don't know. I mean, I didn't look into that. Yeah.
There was also about the hands.
Yeah.
I had heard it slightly different before. I don't know if it was a mistake on who I heard it from or whatever. But I heard that it would slip out if you do it like up here.
Right.
But I had heard that it went.
Yes, that's a possibility too. Yeah, between the radius and the ulna, that's an easy spot to go through, and that's reliable.
And hand was considered.
So the hand, no, just the wrist to fingers. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So for that part, you know, Thomas would have said, "I want to put my finger through your arms."
Right.
But yeah, so but yes, I've seen that too, like crucifixion through the arms, and that's totally makes sense. Ray?
You know, as I saw this today, I see the pain, the horror, the struggle that Jesus went through, and I have to think about how does it impact my life?
Yeah.
What did it did for me? And I just, I mean, when I look at it, it wants to bring me to tears to go, Jesus did that for me.
Yeah.
How is it personal to me? And it's a great study, and it can only be a study, but what did it do for me? Jesus died on the cross for my sins. He rose from the dead for me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the impact that I get from it.
Yeah.
And want to be able to share with other people.
Yeah.
Share the gospel with others that that's what he did for you during this Easter time. Jesus died for me. He died for you. I think for me that's been the most important part of this lesson. The history is great. It's awesome. But what's the impact on my personal life?
Well, for sure. And then, you know, someone who comes to you and say, you know, going through a tough time, I'm suffering. Well, let me introduce you to someone who suffered. You know? Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah, very good. Yeah. Oh. Oh yeah.
And the curtain in the temple was torn from top to bottom.
Yep.
Right.
A lot of people don't notice that that curtain was 4 inches thick.
Thank you.
It could not have been done by 4 inches thick from what I've
Thank you.
heard. Like, don't quote me, but it was quite thick.
It's not easy to figure.
David?
So,
Yeah. One last thing I wanted to touch on was like, I got the latter half of your talk, so it was awesome. I got to see a lot of like things I didn't know. And one thing I want to say is like, our faith is very historical, and that's why it's relatable, like how you mentioned, because like it's not some like one-off thing like, oh, this happened and it doesn't relate to me. Like no, like our faith can be backed up, and that's why like even when we recite a creed every Sunday, or not during Lent, but typically we say Jesus Christ was crucified under a certain emperor, right, at a certain time, and he rose 3 days later. It wasn't just like, okay, he died and he rose sometime, I don't know, right? It's like we have all of these periodical times that our Lord suffered, and I think like speaking with those that don't believe in the faith, it's like just like so convincing when you say like, look, our Lord was literally like again real person. He was a physical person, and we have records that show it. You know, and I think it just proves the point that I'm glad to be Christian.
Yeah. And also to connect back to now, like, and he is alive today too, and that's that. And where is he living? Well, hopefully in my heart. And then and he's in the Word, he's in the Eucharist. I mean, that's another thing too. I mean, he's as alive today as he was back then, and that should be like a big turn on for people when suddenly you realize what that means, And he's alive in his suffering, but he's also alive in his glory. And I can't wait for Easter to kind of brighten the mood. And now, hopefully, you can tell why I didn't want to present that after Easter. Yeah, because like today, I spent this past couple of weeks really, kind of focusing my work on that kind of stuff. But you can't focus the whole year on that. I'm glad we have liturgical seasons, because Jesus is more than the suffering. Of course, it's redemptive. Everything has to fit together, but there's a nice cycle.
what I like about the Shroud of Turin is our proof they lived and died. Proof, because nothing that we have nowadays can replicate what was done to that shroud.
Yeah.
That is proof of his resurrection.
Yeah.
And that is an actual 3D image.
Yeah.
And there's nothing in the world that can replicate what was done to that shroud. They're looking at 68 billion watts of pure laser light energy over 1/40th billionth of a second.
Yeah.
More power than the Back to the
1
Future.
second is on the
That's just amazing. That's how sure is our.
Yep.
Here's our proof.
Yep.
Was there anything like, it was Matthew's gospel account, like corroborating evidence of the high priest's Sanhedrin, or the cover up of the resurrection, when they mentioned the Jews had paid off the guards, saying that the body was stolen.
Yep.
Yeah.
They bragged on
Or because of Matthew being the tax collector, you would have that corroborating evidence.
Well, it makes sense.
I don't know anyone. That's up for everybody.
I think-
Yeah, I'm not the gospel expert. Yeah.
It is in his gospel.
Yeah.
Well, isn't it true that if you were to fall asleep on guard, you'd die, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's one thing.
Right.
Biblical scholars said, like, look, if you compared to that time, it's like very unlikely that a guard would fall asleep because you died.
Yeah.
And they want to die.
Yeah. One great movie about that is is it The Case for Christ? By Okay, so Jesus, by Lee Strobel. And they made a good movie out of it too. It's really good. And it goes over these different things, like, so did Jesus actually die? Did he actually resurrect? And it's really well done. It's like done as an investigation. Journalist investigating the different things that could have happened if if it was a fraud, but it's really nicely debunked.
What do you want to believe? Because the women were the first ones there.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's great. Well, this book is a great one. This one is a really good one too. It's actually my mother-in-law who recommended that one. The day Christ died, and it's just the hour by hour account of Jesus' passion. And so the chapters titles are 9 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m. And so you can read it this week, right as you go through Holy Week. And there's some bigger chapters in the middle that talks about the Jewish world, the Roman world, and stuff like this. But it's a really good meditation on Jesus' last days. So that's a really good one. And it kind of touches on some things that I presented today. Yeah. So yeah, don't forget Thursday at the Union. What time?
On Thursday, 6 o'clock. Yeah.
6 o'clock. Passion of the Christ.
No, don't show up on that. It's a huge LED screen.
The Union. Yeah. So the Union is located on Gary and Monterey. It's the old YMCA building, and it's free, right?
It's free.
Yeah.
It's free.
Is the cafe going to be open?
I
Maybe?
think so.
Yeah.
There'll be some snacks.
Okay, great. Yeah.
For sale, yeah.
So we're good. All right. Thank you.